It is what you would call a classic difficult decision, but figuring out which way it's going to go, not that difficult at all. Late Kick is live. It is Sunday night, July 2nd, the year of our Lord 2023. We're jam-packed high atop a free as free can be downtown Nashville, Tennessee, headed into an extended weekend. I know for a lot of you, many of you are going to intentionally save this show to listen to when you're on the road tomorrow or the next day. Be safe and enjoy it, because I have a feeling this one's going to be pretty lengthy. Immunity. There's a decision coming for college football, and I mean a really, really monumentally huge decision that will have long-reaching consequences. I think I already know what the decision's going to be, and it's going to make some of you curl up in that morality blanket, and it's going to make others who don't like wearing the morality blanket say, take off that morality blanket. Whomst amongst us hasn't been there before. And it could turn some of you who are not contenders into major contenders. You have no clue where I'm going with that, do you? Well, you will in a second. I got week one thoughts. We're not too far away, you know, you and I. We're not too far away where we can start to talk about that. It is opinion night for Steve Sarkisian, since this has gone so wonderful and debate-free so far when the head coach's opinion poll is thrown out. I'm going to talk about Sark tonight. I'm going to talk about some what-ifs. I'm going to talk about bold predictions. I have got some Heisman dark horses, 3 of them, although one I really have circled. Ironically, he is in Austin, Texas. And we're putting the spotlight on Tennessee. All of that, okay? If that doesn't sound jam-packed enough, some of you don't care about this. Many of you do, and I'm not going to talk about it to lead the show, but somewhere buried deep within this show will be a little Easter egg that is probably one of the strongest show recommendations that I have ever given you guys. And it is a long weekend, so some of you are going to go out of town and you'll be busy. Others have absolutely nothing to do except sit on the couch. And all of you are eventually going to have free time. I got a banger for you. I got one I guarantee 100% of you are going to like. And if you don't, it's a you problem. It's not an us problem. They're watching us in Denver, Colorado, Prattville, Alabama, Southington, Connecticut, Port St. Lucie, Florida. I promised you when we went off air Thursday night, we were going to have a new addition to the family on Sunday night. Colin, I don't think we need to waste any more of their time. I told you once, if I've told you 1,000 times, my dream was to one day be able to talk about college football for a living. We achieved that one a lot quicker than I thought we would. And so then the other dream I had was to have my own Floyd of Rosedale trophy. It is the Iowa versus Minnesota rivalry. It is what the winner gets to hoist. I would risk life and limb for this if I played for the Golden Gophers or the Hawkeyes, but I didn't get recruited by either. And so I have to settle for begging. And one of you came through. Kyle, as a matter of fact, came through. And if you're listening on podcast, this is tough because we have an image up on the screen. It is probably one of the harder college football images ever captured, thanks to producer Jesse, who was on the spot in the break room. I carry this thing around me at all times. It's behind me on the show. When we get off of the show, Director Colin takes the rest of the stuff around here and he boxes it up. The Floyd comes with me, and so we appreciate it. Also, as you'll notice, let me get out of the way, as you'll notice, our buddy Preston Battles Customs there on Instagram and Twitter, not only did he come through with the Late Kick helmet, we got a brand new Pate State helmet over here, and I put a lot of pictures up on the socials, but notice the railroad tracks that run right up and down the middle of the helmet. We are so loaded with things that we don't really deserve around here. We appreciate it because we have not purchased any of this. You guys have just sent it in. Half the time, I don't even know how you find the office address, but I sure am glad you do, except for some of the prison mail. Some of the prison mail gets a little sketchy every now and then, but I just changed the address and sent it to Bradley and pretend it was labeled to him the whole time. All right, I told you about the difficult decision for college football. Let's dive into it. Going a lot of different directions tonight. We want to make this show a little extended because, hey, I think a few more people than usual are watching. Oh, by the way, happy 400th show to us. Kind of treating it like a birthday. We're not really celebrating it, but we appreciate you appreciating it. College football has got a really difficult decision ahead. One of those classic difficult decisions, and I'll tell you what it has to do with. It's not transfer portal. It's not NIL. You know what it is? It's Saudi Arabia. That's the difficult decision college football has coming. And I know exactly what most of you are thinking. Oh, that same thing the PGA's dealt with? Yes, friends, the same thing the PGA has dealt with. Money is undefeated against morality in sports. I have looked at the records. I had McGrady pull us a stat sheet today, and it was like morality 0 and money 1,000,000 when it comes to the head-to-head matchup. So here's what's going to happen. This is what do we want to call it? An inevitability. This is coming. It's going to happen. Number one, you're going to have to choose your side. And then number two, you're going to have to ask yourself, could this be a game changer for my program or my conference, but especially my team, my program? David Ubben has been on a heater over at The Athletic. I think he has been writing some of the best features in what normal casuals would call the offseason. No offseason for us here, and apparently no offseason for David Ubben, so I would encourage you to go over to The Athletic if you haven't already. It's a couple of days old now. Read the feature he did, because you know what it did? It sounded a lot like something we talked about here, I think back in December. And what I talked about at the time was the Pac-12 being very vulnerable. And the Pac-12 was desperate, still are, by the way, as they're negotiating their media rights deal. And we don't exactly know when that's going to conclude. We think there'll be news sometime soon. But basically, the long and short of it is, you got a couple of superpowers in the Big Ten and the SEC, and they're just distancing themselves. And then you got the Pac-12 openly being told, we're not even interested in having you on our airwaves. I mean from the ESPNs of the world. At any price, we're just not even interested. That's bad. That's bad for leverage. That's bad for business. And I said at the time, maybe you'll remember this, I said, college football is ripe for either an entity or one person, ideally a multi-millionaire to a billionaire, to come in and essentially own a conference. Now, you can't purchase the actual rights to the Pac-12, but what you could do is you could come in and you could third-party broker a deal with a major media entity like ESPN that offers them that content for pennies on the dollar. And while it sounds like you'd be operating at a loss in that equation, you're not. What you're purchasing is messaging and marketing power. If I ran, as I said, if I ran Josh Pate Entertainment Enterprises, and I spent billions in marketing around the world, I look at the Pac-12, and I look at the member institutions, and I look at the TV deal, the distribution, in other words, that I could have with ESPN, and I foster a deal that's in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and in exchange, I've got a great marketing and messaging arm in my back pocket that is attached to the second most popular sport in the United States of America. It shocks me no one's done this yet, but hey, it is what it is. Well, anyway, David Ubben goes, and he takes it a step further. He goes all the way overseas with it. He says, the English Premier League's done it. WWE has done it. When's college football going to do it? What is that, David? Oh, take Saudi money. And, of course, you know about the PGA, Live Golf, etc. Take Saudi money. When is that going to happen? So he goes and he talks to 4 athletic directors off the record. And it became very, very clear in reading the transcript of his talk with them that as he presented it, it feels like it took him off guard a little bit. But then, as much as you could feel this through a written piece, it's almost like you could feel and hear them stroking their chins. As David asks the questions, they go, that would never... Wait a second, hold on. Could that happen? Yeah, that'd probably happen. That's almost how the tenor of the piece went. One of them... This tells you everything you need to know about what moral platform these folks are actually dealing off of. One of them said, a few years ago, I would have told you there's a 10% chance of that happening. But now that Live Golf and the PGA has done what they've done, respectively, I'd say it's more like 50% of schools would be open to that. Well, obviously nothing changed in what is right and what is wrong perceptionally versus in real life. It's just, it's public perception. It's PR. That's all that's ever been about. It's the same thing with gambling. Gambling, sports betting, and taking advertising dollars from that kind of industry used to be totally taboo. You just hiss whenever a FanDuel or a DraftKings would be mentioned. Now everyone's in bed with them. Did everyone radically change their opinion on gambling? No. I'd say that Supreme Court overturn in 2018 had a lot to do with it, and the legalization of sports betting had a lot to do with it. But I was never told MLB and NFL and college football shied away just because it wasn't legal. I was told they shied away because there was something wrong with it. Did the wrong all of a sudden evaporate? Or did the negative perception surrounding that sort of partnership rapidly evaporate? Same thing with Saudi money as it approaches college football. Now, this hasn't happened yet. The idea amongst many, including the folks that David Ubben was talking to, some of the folks I've talked to, myself, just using intuition and nothing more, is that this is an inevitability. You're going to have to answer that question. College football is going to have to answer that question of, do we take Saudi money if they come towards us, either a conference as a whole or an athletic department? Let's say you're a little cash strapped. Let's say you're not Alabama or Ohio State. Let's say you're a mid-tier. And let's say you're watching those big boys disappear off in the distance. There's no shot of you catching up using traditional methodology. And all of a sudden, you got the Saudi money sitting there that you know would instantly put you neck and neck with them in terms of a P&L. And by them, I mean the big boys in college football. Your job's on the line. I mean, the future of your athletic department, your college football program's on the line. You know what the return would be. I think most of us, therefore, know what the answer is going to be when this opportunity does start to present itself, and it's going to very, very soon, because nothing's going to stop it. Saudi money knocks on the door of college football. What's really going to stop that? The NCAA is not going to stop that, no more than they would stop a normal booster donating to a collective. How are you going to stop it? It's all legal. I can assure you there will be no gentleman's agreement. Those never work in college football. Hey, I've got all the research I need here. There are 2 words written on this piece of paper: the Alliance. Anyone remember the Alliance? Rest in peace to the Alliance, by the way. That was when, the ACC and the Pac-12 and the Big Ten got together. They locked arms and they said, we're in this together. And then the Pac-12 looked around and said, where did the Big Ten go? Why are they over there talking to USC and UCLA? Hey, we got an alliance over here. No, you didn't. You never did. And likewise, I don't care how many gentlemen agree to each other's faces that they won't partner with the likes of the Saudis, because we know what happens when the lights go out. We know what happens when they disperse. We know what happens behind closed doors. And it only takes one to break ranks, and then everyone, it kind of becomes a free-for-all, and everyone breaks ranks. This will happen for like the 4th time. This will happen. There is tremendous value in doing this. So like I told you earlier, it stuns me that no one's done this already. The Saudis or just a random billionaire out there. When you look at the power behind the marketing and messaging play that comes with owning a college football team or a conference, I can't believe no one's done this before. Now, I get pushback sometimes on this because I've talked about this sometimes with you guys one-on-one or doing radio hits. And people say, Josh, that's stupid. You can't buy Michigan. You can't buy Minnesota football. Like, it's not for sale. Doesn't have to be for sale. And it doesn't take too big a brain. I know, because I figured this out to execute a little workaround here. I don't need to own Penn State. I don't need to own Tennessee athletics or Tennessee football. What I need to do is be the largest donor. And the largest donor, relative to what some of these folks spend for marketing in the real world, cutting a $15 or a $20 million check per year to South Carolina football makes me the number 1 voice in Columbia, South Carolina, by 10 miles. I get say in AD hires. I get say in coaching hires. They can't do anything without me because they become beholden to that money. Now, you may say, well, they don't need it. That's true. They don't need it. South Carolina, and I'm just using them as an example, would not need that kind of money for me to remain South Carolina. They would need it, as would dozens of other programs, to become more than the current version of themselves. You look at the gap between you and the top dogs. How do you make it up? You make it up with someone like me coming into town. And it doesn't cost a lot. If you think about, again, what I spend to run my fictitious enterprise in marketing and advertising per year, it's peanuts to drop 15 or 20 mil. That's a rounding error. That is a marketing supply budget for me if I'm a major global entity to dump into a collective over here in exchange for really having the biggest voice in the athletic department and, in a de facto roundabout way, owning that athletic department. Now, no one's done that to this point. You've got examples like Phil Knight at Oregon, T. Boone Pickens, et cetera, at Oklahoma State, but really no one has done it in the way I'm talking about. I think they will do it. And the marketing and messaging is very, very key there for reasons that I just mentioned. But David Ubben's piece just talked about athletic departments on an individual basis. He talked to athletic directors, and he wondered aloud, what happens if Saudi money knocks on the door and you're Tulsa or you're Nebraska or whatever? Not that those are equal programs or anything like that. But what happens? And there's a lot of what happens. There's a lot of speculation. I looked at it, and I say, if I'm the Saudis, why stop at a team? Why stop at if I'm the Saudis, why stop at an individual athletic department? If I want to own something, why don't I just own a conference? And this goes right back to what I told you in December. If I were them, if I had that kind of capital on hand and I was aggressive with it, I'd go to the Pac-12 tomorrow and I would say, you can't get a media rights deal executed? I can, because I don't have to profit off of it. So you guys are looking for how many hundreds of mil per year? And they won't give you that. They'll give you half that, a third of that. Well, hold on a second. And I call them up and say, I'll broker the deal. I'll fit the bill. You just give me the distribution. You give me the time slots. And if you're uncomfortable with me, Saudi Arabia, paying you directly, if you don't want my name on the check, we'll just wash the cash. You ultimately know where it's coming from, though. I think they'd say yes tomorrow to that. As long as you could sort of wash it for public view, and washing, by the way, is what this is all about to begin with in the Saudis' eyes. As long as you can do that, and you don't take slings and arrows for too long publicly, they'd do it tomorrow. Pac-12 would do it. A major media entity would do it. Saudis would certainly do it. And then they get the opportunity to do one more thing. David Ubben mentioned it in his piece. And this is where I think the value play is for anyone who's looking to score PR points, maybe even in lieu of an immediate return on investment, dollars and cents wise. There is coming a day pretty quickly, many think, myself included, that employment status is granted to college football players and college athletes in general. Many college athletes think that that will be the best day of their lives. It will actually be the worst day of many college athletes' lives, because that will be the last day that their scholarship is ever covered. If you play one of the Olympic sports, if you're not a running back for the University of Oklahoma, if you're just running track and field for them, chances are your scholarship evaporates that day. Unless someone steps in. You know what that sounds like, by the way? If you come in heroically at the 11th hour, once the Pac-12 and all of college sports is granted employment status, and therefore they cannot fund the Olympic sports anymore, so they turn into club sports, and you're not on scholarship, you're not being paid what you would have been paid, and all of a sudden you come in there and you're looked at with that cape on, knight in shining armor, saving Olympic sports, including women's sports. You know how they'd talk about you? Talk about you a lot different than they talk about you right now if you're Saudi Arabia. That's the play, by the way. For those of you sort of ignorant to all this, that's the play. The entire game plan from the Saudis is they know what their global perception, they know what their global reputation is right now, well-earned, might I add, and they want to change that. And this is called sports washing. And it's very effective, and it will continue to be effective because we care about sports a whole heck of a lot in this country. And college football is no different. So this is going to happen. NCAA is not going to stop it. Gentlemen's agreements will not stop it. There are very undervalued assets here, and there's desperation in the room. And I don't think I need to break out a calculator and explain to you what happens when that one plus that one meet. Let's move it along, because we have a very, very jam-packed show tonight. I don't know that, when we came up here, Colin, we started the show in 2020 in Nashville. I don't know what the prop bet market would have looked like if you told me, hey, one day you're going to lead a show with a combination of a little bit of college football, a little bit of Saudi Arabia. What are your thoughts? I would have thought college football became an Olympic sport. I don't know what's happening. This is what's happening. Moving right along, appreciate you guys being tuned in live. If you haven't already, hit the thumbs up button. That's called liking the video, and subscribing to the channel. We had a nice little influx of subscribers. We're still not to 200,000, but we've had a nice little influx recently. So let's keep riding that wave as long as we can. The what-if season is wide open. What if this or that happens this fall? What sends the maximum amount of reverberation through the sport? Well, the first one we're going to talk about tonight would have college football-wide impact. Ewan said, what if Texas A&M has another down season? I'm going to take that to mean 7, 6 wins, something like that. Well, the first thing we have to obviously ask is if that were to be the case, what happens to Jimbo Fisher? Currently, his buyout would be $77 million after 2023. It would be $68 million after 2024. Those are just huge numbers. Most of us don't traffic in. I mean, those are management type numbers. We don't traffic. You and I don't traffic in those kind of numbers. We can barely count that high. And so there are differing schools of thought out there. There's one school of thought that Texas A&M football is so important that there is no buyout high enough. If you're underachieving, if they think the only thing separating them from championship contention is the head coach, they'll buy him out at any cost. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought is no one in their right mind is paying a guy $77 million not to coach the football team. You decide which school you belong to. But in the meantime, if this doesn't happen, well, obviously that also means the whole Bobby Petrino hire probably didn't work out. They didn't do any better than they did last year in one-score games. They had, I think, 5 losses, was it, last year by 6 points or less? So that probably repeated itself. This is not an easy road slate, by the way, for the Aggies. This is exhibit number 1 million, why I could not care less how many conference games you play as the end-all, be-all metric, because I'm looking at their schedule. They play, this is the road stretch for them. They go to Miami, to Tennessee, to LSU, to Ole Miss. They also play Arkansas in Dallas, and that is not to mention the fact that they play Auburn and Alabama at home, and they get South Carolina in there too. So that's a lot of close football games, to say the least. And if this happens, the reason I say it reverberates college football wide is because I believe this is a keystone job, and the keystone job is one where they can afford to put themselves in the market for anyone. There is no amount of money they would not spend on a salary pool for the right group of head coaches. It would be almost a ready-made roster to win with immediately. Administration is great. The fan base is unmatched in terms of passion. So it would be a turnkey at one of the highest levels of the sport if it were to ever come open. But here's the other side of that. What if this isn't true? And what if it does work out? And that's not what was asked, but I'm asking it. You know, what if A&M totally turns it around this year? You see why that's one of those inflection point teams? Think about how different that looks. Think about how different it sounds asking about whether Jimbo Fisher is going to be fired the first week of December versus is Texas A&M going to extend Bobby Petrino multiple years and double his salary because this just works so well? Is A&M going to win the SEC championship game? Could literally go either way with a roster as good as theirs. Next up, Nola said, what if Penn State wins the Big Ten? This is a game changer for James Franklin. This is his arrival to the Tier 1 college football table. I think that's what it would sound like, because I think if Penn State wins the Big Ten, I think they're in the college football playoff. Not the 12-team version, the 4-team version. The version many of you think they're incapable of breaking through and entering. They have got the third best odds to win the Big Ten right now. They go to Ohio State. Just to give you an idea of what the odds market thinks about that, they play at Ohio State in Week 8. They are a 10.5-point dog. They play against Michigan at home 3 weeks later, and Michigan is favored by about 2.5 at Penn State. So they are a dog, not huge, but they are a dog in both of their biggest games. If they do pull this off, though, and they absolutely have the capability. Forget about quarterback for a second. If Drew Aller plays at a high level, that's like a whole nother stratosphere of a conversation. But they have a great tandem in the backfield. They probably have the best left tackle in football. They have a phenomenal defense led by a phenomenal defensive coordinator in Manny Diaz. Not a lot of holes on that team. So this is not something that would be shocking, but there's a group of people that would be shocked by it, because there's a group of people that just think the ceiling for that team, the ceiling for a James Franklin program is below that. I don't happen to be that, but this would be, I think, the biggest step they've taken as a program in a long, long time. That would be playoff access. That would be really big. It would be not just for this year. Think about what that does for recruiting. Think about the hype machine behind Penn State going into 2024. So if Aller takes them to the playoff, a Big Ten championship and a probable playoff trip as a true freshman, you're talking about preseason national championship consideration for Penn State the following year. You would have them in conversations they've never been in under James Franklin up there, or in most of our lifetimes, actually. Next up, now this one's wild. This one's wild, but it does need to be talked about because it just happened. So Ian said, what if TCU makes the playoff again? This was like a Phil Collins special. This was against all odds last year. Close games every week. Somehow, ladies and gentlemen, TCU did not win the Big 12 and went to the playoff. I have said before, and I'll say again, that will be the most misremembered thing about the 2022 season is that TCU won the Big 12. That's how everyone remembers it. They did not. Kansas State did. It's just that TCU's resume was good enough that they didn't need to win their conference title game. Now, that is something you think only happens in the SEC normally or the Big 10. Nope, happened in the Big 12 last year. This would stun me pretty significantly if they were to make it again. Their 2023 S&P Plus ranking is 20th. That's third highest in the Big 12 entering the season, but they're 98th in returning production. Very controversial stat, returning production. They lost their OC, Garrett Riley, to Clemson. They lost their quarterback, top 2 rushers, top 3 wide receivers, and key offensive linemen. They're only one of 3 teams in that conference that have to play OU and Texas. So with all that, what if they still make the playoff? That would cement them as a current top 10 program in college football. That's what it would do. I mean, if anybody pulled that off, if Kirby Smart pulled that off with all those kind of losses, it's a big deal. If Sonny Dykes pulls it off, and therefore his first 2 seasons in Fort Worth equaled 2 playoff appearances, you're talking about sort of rewriting top 10, both in terms of head coaches, in terms of programs. So that'd be a really big deal. And the Big 12 would have representation again. I would also love to know, by the way, if they make it, did they make it at the expense of Texas and OU? Because that's its own little story that needs to be told. Lastly, now this one's the most intriguing probably of the 4. What if an ACC team not named Florida State or Clemson makes that college football playoff? Whomst would this be? We looked at the odds past the top 2. Those are clearly the top 2. You look at the odds past the top 2 in the ACC. You got North Carolina and Louisville tied for 3rd. Miami's 5th. NC State is 6. Pitt is 7. And it pretty much drops off a cliff after that to Duke, for the record. I have a sneaking suspicion that Louisville is just going to figure out a way to hang around this because Louisville has by far the most fortuitous schedule in the ACC. But that would be the talk. If Louisville were to make the playoff, it will be for the fact that they navigated a far less than treacherous schedule. They don't play FSU in the regular season. They don't play Clemson in the regular season. And then they figured out a way to win they either figured out a way to win the ACC championship game or, just follow me here, what if Louisville were to be this year's TCU? They win a bunch of close games. They'll just be favored in a lot of these games, period. They go into Charlotte, I think that's where the game is, undefeated, don't even win the ACC championship game, but the rest of the country shakes out in such a way that 2 teams from the ACC can make it. What if that were to happen? That's a big what if. But if it weren't Louisville, if Miami does this, you need to listen to me very closely. I tell you all the time, you're not ready for Texas to be back, or you're not ready for Alabama fans if Alabama really, truly falls off. I'm not totally sure. In fact, I'm very sure the rest of the country is not ready for Miami to be back. You're not ready for 56-year-old sports writers to start using the word swagger. You're not ready for folks throwing that U up in your face, in the middle of a grocery store. You're not ready for all of those T-shirts with the stickers still on them all over the country. Miami's a really unique place. Miami is a place probably more so than any major school in the country where that big a percentage of the fan base did not go there. So it's a pretty small school. It's a private school. So a vast majority of the alumni are not actually alumni. They just identify with Miami. And nothing wrong with that. I got no problem with that. But it makes for a different dynamic when you're not winning. When you're not winning, those folks don't have the same kind of attachment that you, a Mississippi State fan, have because you graduated from there and you've lived within 20 miles of Starkville your whole life. That's a different kind of attachment. A lot of these folks live in L.A., They live in Atlanta. They live in Raleigh. They live in New York. And a lot of them live in Miami. But if you're not winning, they're not giving you that time like they would if they were in Auburn. But here's where some of you are wrong. Some of you think, oh, Miami game day atmosphere leaves a lot to be desired. It does when they're losing. I will promise you, and I know I'm right because I've seen it happen, I will promise you, if Miami gets things figured out, if they're back on top of the ACC, if Miami is ever a college football playoff contender, they will sell out Hard Rock. Make no mistake about it, because it almost happened a few years ago. There's just a game that's kind of been forgotten by the public. It was in the latter portion of the Mark Richt era. They played Notre Dame down there. Smoked them, by the way. And Hard Rock Stadium was unlike anything you've seen down there outside of a playoff game or a national title game. It was jammed to the rafters. You couldn't hear anything. Everybody was stunned. I was talking to someone who was with the broadcast crew a few weeks ago, and they were talking about that game. They were saying, people think Miami can't pack a stadium. No, they're not going to pack a stadium or come close to it if the team's not good. If the team's good, it is the most radical difference. It's the most radical turnaround in the nature of a fan base that you'll see anywhere. USC is kind of like that. Miami is absolutely like that. So there are some very consequential what-ifs there on the sheet tonight. You know what I need to do? I need to show you some pictures. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is I need to tell you, before you go outside tomorrow, go to Academy Sports and Outdoors. It'll do everyone a world of good. They sell everything you need, virtually everything you need. One of you sent me a picture the other day, and you purchased some Big League Chew in the checkout line at Academy. Yes, they carry such things. But they also have, they got outdoors wear, they got swimwear if you need it tomorrow. Probably a pool noodle or two could be found around Academy. You need one of those basketball hoops that fits in the swimming pool. They got everything taken care of. And so that is your outdoor sporting goods supplier, plus grills, tents, etc. But I tell you all the time, a lot of you guys send me evidence that you go there. So I showed you a couple of weeks ago a few pictures. If you're listening on podcast, we are looking at a picture of a friend of the program. Well, one of those is a mannequin. Ignore the mannequin for a second. But there is a real-life person seated in a chair at Academy. Great chairs at Academy. That's Dirk. Dirk did not send me these pictures to celebrate himself. He wanted us to know that little baby Iris, welcome to the world, Iris, made her first trip to an Academy Sports and Outdoors, and there's little baby Iris, both indoors and outside the Academy in Birmingham, Alabama. So from us to you, Iris, you're off to a great start in life, far greater than I was. It was several years before I went to Academy Sports and Outdoors, and you're there before you can even talk. Who knows? You know, I need to keep in touch with Dirk. Maybe her first word would be Academy. And if you could capture that also on iPhone, it would greatly help us. So thank you, all of you guys, for making Academy like a second home so that they make this show free forever. Flap the wings. That's our hope. I guess we got to talk about Steve Sarkisian, don't we? Jesse wants me to ask you to like the video because 400 of you have, and there are like 1,600 of you watching. Do the fractions. Come on now. Click the thumbs up button. Next up in the show tonight, I asked you your opinion of Steve Sarkisian, and boy, did you deliver. Steve Sarkisian, head coach at Texas, about to enter his third year. Great trivia question. Where was he a head coach before at Texas? And the answer is Alabama. No, he wasn't. He was the offensive coordinator at Alabama, except the Iron Bowl in 2020. When he was the interim because Nick Saban had to stay home due to the evils of COVID. Break that out at your next college football trivia night. See how many people get it. Steve Sarkisian, 1-0, undefeated as a head coach at Alabama. There is no head coach in America that could change the perception of himself more in 1 year than Steve Sarkisian this fall in Austin. They're favored to win the Big 12. If they do it, they'll be right there in college football playoff consideration. They got a stacked quarterback room. They got a stacked wide receiver room. They're recruiting very, very well. The opinion that I got more often than not from you today is no one questions his acumen as an offensive coordinator, as a play caller. He is lethal in both of those categories. But the most popular refrain from you, and this was not a surprise to me, was, think he's a great play caller, great offensive coordinator. I've either got questions about him as a head coach or I just don't think he's a good head coach. It was something along those lines. So I'll address that in a second. But there were several of you, in fact, a surprising number of you, who said, I think this is a make or break year for Steve Sarkisian. No, it's not. This is not a make or break year for him. Let me ask you a question. What do you mean by break? Do you mean if he doesn't win a certain number of games, he's fired? Is that what you mean? Certainly, if they go 9-3 in the regular season, they haven't arrived, but he's not getting fired. So what are we talking about? That phrase is thrown around far too loosely in college football. They hope for more than 9-3, but I can confidently tell you, if Sark goes 9-3, number one, that means he improved on last year's record and will have improved every year he's been at Texas. And number two, he will be back to lead the Longhorns in 2024. It is not a make or break year. If they go 4-8, then you start having a different conversation. I don't think they're going to go 4-8 this year. Then again, I said A&M was disaster-proof last year, and we saw that worked out. So no promises, but I feel pretty confident about that. Steve Sarkisian also has had a very public battle with alcoholism in the past. I respect anyone who's public about that. I've watched it before up close. It is disgusting. I mean, it's something that I don't think is properly talked about in just the mainstream conversation, because a lot of folks haven't been around it. Many people haven't experienced it. I haven't experienced it personally. I eliminate it from the equation. I don't drink at all. That's the only way to 100% guarantee it. But I've watched people go through it, and you can so clearly tell people who have gone through it or personally witnessed it close up versus people who haven't. The ones who haven't are the ones who joke about it and are flippant about it, which I think is kind of pathetic. And I saw a lot of that today. That is what it is. I'm not going to traffic in that. But Steve Sarkisian is a guy who, because of those sorts of external factors, really cost himself early opportunities in his career. This is nothing that he hasn't spoken about publicly, and I respect the heck out of anyone who will talk about it publicly. And so he goes to Alabama. There were hiccups at Alabama. I remember one year, they were on the field celebrating. First time I ever talked to Steve Sarkisian, they were on the field celebrating. And ironically, he did the same thing Kiffin would do. When Alabama would be celebrating winning the SEC or even a playoff game or a national title, he and Kiffin, when they were there respectively, they would stand off to the side. They would stand off out where the media is standing on the field, and they would just kind of watch from afar. They wouldn't be up on the stage. They'd be out of the spotlight. And I walked up to him. I said, man, I want you to know I'm really, really happy for you. And he said, man, I appreciate that more than anything you'll know. Just moved right along. But I remember that because I felt it. I didn't say it to him just to, introduce myself. I said it to him because he had been really open about the battles that he had faced, just inner demons, just stuff that has nothing to do with football that obviously impacts football. And it's very, very well documented how it went down at Washington. It's very well documented how he sort of resurrected his career at Alabama, and now he gets a shot at Texas. And there are a lot of folks out there, every bit within their right, to doubt whether he'll ultimately be the guy who brings Texas back. But I'm just telling you, if he does, and they're recruiting very well right now, and they're trending very well right now, if he does, think about the added layer. I mean, think about the story that is, and sort of the motivational aspect, the motivational layer that's woven in there, maybe for people who don't even care about college football. You get a guy who is in the depths of alcoholism, completely rehabilitates his image, competes at the highest level of the sport, goes to work for the best in the world in Nick Saban, gets his endorsement to the point where I don't think I ever saw Nick Saban yell at him. Saban would chew Kiffin's head off every other quarter in Tuscaloosa. Sark was so lethal at Alabama. Saban thought to himself, what can I say to this guy? That's how good Steve Sarkisian was as a coordinator and a play caller. And if he goes through that and then he goes to Texas and undertakes what the Texas head coaching job is, by the way, it's a job and it's a situation that has been thought by some in the past to be unwinnable because of all the mess you have to deal with internally. If he, of all people, dealing with what he's dealt with in his personal life, is the one who goes in there and who navigates those waters and brings Texas back just as they're about to enter the SEC, mind you, Think about what kind of story that is in the history of college football, not just Texas, in the history of college football. So I watch it from that vantage point. Like, that's what I look at. And also, if you want my personal opinion on this, I think he's really good. I think Steve Sarkisian is being treated sort of like many other younger head coaches are. Now, Sark is not as young or as wet behind the ears as a Lincoln Riley when he was at Oklahoma, or Kirby at Georgia, or Ryan Day at Ohio State. Sark had head coaching jobs before. He messed them up. And then he worked his way back up, got another shot, and now he's got one of the big boy jobs in college football. But it's sort of the same process in place. So some of the same mechanisms are in place. People looking at him like they look at Lincoln Riley, like they look at Kiffin sometimes, like they look at Ryan Day. Yeah, these guys are really good offensive minds. And yeah, man, their offense any given Saturday can score 50 on you. But is the culture conducive to playing the kind of defense that you have to play? The overall team football aspect, is it conducive to playing championship caliber football? So far, the answer's been no at Texas. But then again, they had to rebuild at Texas. They didn't necessarily have to rebuild at Oklahoma or Ohio State. They got to rebuild at Texas. And that's the point. They've been doing it. And here's why I think it's ultimately going to work out. I think Steve Sarkisian will be a successful head coach at Texas. I strongly, believe it or not, believe in him this year. The reason is because he has not gone in there and just littered his roster with a bunch of wide receivers and running backs, quarterbacks. He's gone in there and rebuilt the line of scrimmage. He's got a really, really good recruiting staff. I mean, they got over a century of NFL experience in that coaching room. Those guys know what they're doing. And that also indicates, by the way, there are a lot of folks perfectly willing to tie their name to the name Steve Sarkisian. You may not think about that as being significant. It is. Coordinators, position coaches, yeah, they make a lot of money when they go to Texas, but they also know if they hitch their wagon to a losing horse, sometimes it can torpedo their career. So guys have to be shrewd about those moves, just like head coaches do, just like recruits do. They got the players. And when you have the players and you're never going to hurt in the quarterback room, I'll tell you this. If I had to go against them, if I were looking at Texas and Texas was my rival, or I knew I was going to deal with Texas, you can laugh at them right now if you want to. If I were a coach and I knew what Sark was capable of, I would be terrified of him getting the entire cultural aspect figured out. Because Texas with culture figured out is a superpower in college football. It's happened before, hadn't happened in a while. A lot of you apparently don't think it can happen with him. Hey, that's the fun of watching the games get played, man. Like it's as fun and as serious as that on Saturday. I want to put this right here, immunity. I'm going to do bold predictions right now. After bold predictions, now that we're into the show a little bit, I got a recommendation for you guys and girls. I've got a recommend. I don't hand these out very often, but I got a recommendation for you. It's going to change your life. I hope I can follow through on that. All right, let me take a sip from the chalice. We're 43 minutes into the show. We're going an hour and a half. But I don't apologize because I look at our audience retention metrics, and you guys don't tune out, that's for sure. Bold predictions, Chapter 14. They're getting bolder and bolder. What do you believe about this college football season that you would bet your money on? Well, we got a good one right out of the gate here, and it has to do with those Clemson Tigers. Cleve, great name, by the way. Cleve says Clemson's going 15-0. Do you think it's bolder to predict this or bolder to predict that I will rightfully pronounce Clemson one day down the road? I think both are pretty bold. This is a 9 for me. Some people being Jesse, some people said this should not be all the way up at a 9. Well, I'll give you my reasoning. So Clemson going undefeated and winning the title. They did it in 2018. We've seen them do it before. We've seen them win multiple titles under Dabo. 4 out of the last 5 national champions, by the way, were undefeated. So more often than not, that's what it's taken. They have got a team win total of 10. They've got the 6th best odds in the country, tied for 5th tied for 6th to win the national championship. This would be Dabo Swinney just storming back into the head room of college football. Now, I would argue he hasn't left it, but I get disagreement on that. Well, no one would disagree. If Clemson goes undefeated, I mean, that means the Garrett Riley hire worked out phenomenally. That means Cade Klubnik played at a great high level all year. It also means they beat Duke, Florida State, Notre Dame, Miami, North Carolina, South Carolina. The ACC championship game they got to win, and they won a playoff game and the national title. That is difficult, very difficult. They could lose one of those games and still win the title, but to win all of them, that's why it's a 9 for me, given the blend of how competitive some of those games should be and the uncertainty right now. That's what you got to call it, uncertainty. So that's a 9. Next up, I think some of you may go 9 with this one. Edward from Fairhope, Alabama says Auburn is going to win at least one of their games against Bama and Georgia. First thing you know, you got to check with Auburn. Where are these games played? Jordan-Hare Stadium? Okay, if they've got a pulse and they're playing there, they got a shot. The lines are out on these games. They are favored. Well, they're not favored against either. They are an 18.5-point underdog against Georgia at home. That's early in the year, by the way. I think week 5. And then they play Bama last week of the regular season, and they are a 14-point dog against Alabama. Both of those games are at home, though. Auburn beats Georgia or Alabama. This is an 8.5 on the boldness scale for me. You may think I need to go higher than that, but I think I know Auburn, and I think I know what that place is like when they get those particular teams in there. And I took a little break. Like I took Jesse to the Penn State-Auburn game last year, and I was trying to convince producer Jesse, a Penn State grad, mind you. I was trying to convince him, Jesse, you don't know what you're walking into. Jesse, Jordan-Hare Stadium is no joke. I know you go in these Big Ten venues that dwarf Jordan-Hare Stadium in overall capacity, but this place just has a little different soul to it. Splattering. And producer Jesse looks at me as if to say, What happened? Where's the magic? What happened? Well, I was wrong that day. But I'm right in general about what that place is like. Environment plus the unknown. I don't know what Hugh Freeze's team's going to look like this year. No one does. They brought in more 4-star plus portal talent than any team in America. So no one has any clue, including Hugh Freeze, candidly, has no clue what his team's going to look like this year. Could be really good. We'll see. My point is, in the lineage of Auburn football, getting those big games at home and having a ton of unknown can just lead to crazy things happening. So if you think I'm going to put a 9 on the possibility they pull off one of those upsets, you hadn't watched Auburn football long enough. Next up, we got an upset alert here. Trevor from Fort Worth, Texas. It's a long-winded way of saying Kansas is going to upset Oklahoma this year. Well, I only made this a 7.5, and I'll tell you why. It's not that bold. Oklahoma goes there in week 9. Oklahoma's only favored by 6.5. This would not be a massive upset. They've won 18 straight in the series, have the Oklahoma Sooners. So remember, Kansas got started off hot last year, and then they faded really, really quickly. Do they fade again? Because, as I said, this is week 9, not week 2. Kansas will be off a bye in this game. OU's got a game the week before against Central Florida. So Kansas will be rested. Kansas is number 1 in the country in returning production. Jalen Daniels, quarterback, when healthy last year. When healthy, number 1 QBR in the country. There are some things they have going for them there. And the line, as I said, is only 6.5. So I'm making that a 7.5. Not the boldest prediction that we've ever had. Next up, this one's pretty bold. This one was flirting with a 9 for me. Steve said Michigan will lose at least 3 games in the regular season from Richmond, Virginia. That's an 8.75, Steve, on the boldness scale. The team win total is 10.5. Michigan is number 7 in returning production. They are 3rd in the S&P Plus preseason rankings. Let me put it to you like this, Steve. Michigan faces 2 teams this year with a preseason win total over 7, and that's Ohio State and Penn State. Outside of that, if you're looking for a 3rd loss, and that's just assuming they lose both of those games, you're looking for a 3rd loss, Steve. It's going to happen against Minnesota, Maryland, Nebraska, Michigan State. All 4 of those are on the road. Crazier things have happened. They got Purdue, but they got Purdue off a bye. It is tough. I will say this. That trip to Maryland, if you're watching on YouTube, the last 3 weeks of the season, Michigan's schedule goes at Penn State, at Maryland, Ohio State. The second leg of a back-to-back road stretch being sandwiched between a trip to Penn State and a home date against Ohio State, not the easiest thing to manage, but then again, Maryland has been a pretty easy thing to manage, and that's disrespectful, but it's true. So where's the third loss coming from? I mean, this is a sound football team. There are not a lot of questions. They return a ton of guys. There aren't a bunch of unproven units. I have trouble seeing it. So I'm going 8.75 on the boldness scale. Okay, kids, gather around because it is time to take about a 45-second break from college football. I got to tell you something. So our old friend Tim Watts, formerly of this company, and I don't know what he's doing now. What is he? I think he works at the Lee County Flea Market now, or I don't know, some company. But anyway, Watts hits me up like 3 times a day, recommending shows. And so I have had to build a pretty strong filtration process in my own mind. Well, he struck gold. I need you to have Amazon Prime subscriptions if you haven't already, or borrow Colin's password. Daisy Jones and the Six is the best show that I've watched in a long, long, long time. And you know my love for classic rock. Most of my favorite songs were recorded before I was born, and many of my favorite bands existed before I was born. Like, I was the second grader listening to Fleetwood Mac at Sherwood Elementary School in Phoenix City, getting made fun of. How the turntables, by the way, which is an intentional phrase for those of you who don't watch The Office, because now everyone loves Fleetwood Mac. Now they're in every TikTok video. I was on them long before the rest of you were. But anyway, this show is set in the 70s, and it takes elements of the story of Fleetwood Mac, but it's entirely fictitious. But that's not what I want you to take away. It's a phenomenal show. There are original songs in this show. One of them is on my Instagram story right now, by the way, at Late Kick Josh. This is not a real band, people. It's not like you can go see them on tour, but it's like the movie Almost Famous. It's like the movie Rockstar. They took the movie so seriously. They take this show, Daisy Jones and the Six, so seriously. They recorded legit music for a legit album that they're recording sort of during the show. I think Rumors by Fleetwood Mac is the best album ever created. They got 2 songs so far off this show I legit think could go on Rumors, and they would be indistinguishable from listening to Fleetwood Mac. That's how good that stuff is. So go watch. I don't want to spoil anything for you, but go watch, including the studio sessions in the show. It is great. It is like you are immersed in the 70s and watching what music used to be like, the music industry used to be like. It's on Amazon Prime. Daisy Jones and the Six. Could not recommend it anymore. Phenomenal. I guarantee you'll like it. All right, next up, Spotlight time. Team Spotlight tonight. We're going to shine it brightly about 2 hours, let's say, to our east on the University of Tennessee. This is like a preview magazine page. What do you need to know about Tennessee? First question, naturally, is what is the University of Tennessee at quarterback? I just mean as a program. Is this really the kind of program that has found themselves in the sweet spot such that pretty much any quarterback is going to thrive here? Like Lincoln Riley in his career, seems like everyone turns into a Heisman Trophy contender. Is that Josh Heupel? Is Josh Heupel going to be that kind of head coach and that kind of play caller to where Hendon Hooker walks out the door and it's, oh no, look at all that production. And all we have left is Joe Milton. And then Joe Milton just shreds someone in a bowl game. And it turns out it's just a precursor to the next year. And then Nico Iamaleava's behind him. Is it just going to be like a factory? Like a conveyor belt of Heisman caliber quarterbacks? If it is, we'll start to learn about that this year. Because all the preview magazines and all the talk is going to be, I don't know how they're going to make up for that lost production at quarterback. Well, if it's that kind of place, that's how they'll make it up. Question number 2, what kind of level of offensive line play are we going to see here? They got kind of 3 spots up for grabs in the spring. Left tackle, right tackle, I think left guard also up for grabs. That's an area, and obviously that will heavily impact the overall play of quarterback. But the third question, and this is one that cost them last year, big time. Are they going to improve in the back end of their defense? This is one of those that, unlike the other 2 questions I just asked, where if quarterback goes right, it could go really right. And if offensive line goes right, it could go really right. I don't know how right their pass defense could go this year. They don't look like, even at their best, they have a very high ceiling in their secondary. And last year, their secondary was 127th in the country in pass yards per game allowed. They were 76th in explosive plays per game allowed. And it cost them in nights like when they played South Carolina. That's how you open yourself up to just this inexplicable result, like South Carolina going from scoring 0 offensive points against Florida the week before to hanging 60-plus on you. How? You can't stop them. You can't defend a forward pass. And if you're not clicking, if you're not scoring every possession, all of a sudden, even average offenses can pull away from you. So we got to do better there. Got to do a lot better there. What is the best position group on this team? I think you could say quarterback, but like with a number of teams, we're going to skip past quarterback. Wide receiver is probably the best other position group on this team, and that's with Hyatt and Tillman both gone. Squirrel White is a guy that could very much emerge on the national scene this year. And let's be real, the country has waited a long time for an elite player named Squirrel. And we finally got him in Knoxville, no less. We finally got him. But they got Brew McCoy up there. They got Dante Thornton. It was an under-the-radar transfer from Oregon. I thought should have been rated a little higher. He's in Tennessee now. Ramel Keaton, fifth-year guy, he's there. So they got a really good, solid stable at the receiver position. But if Squirrel White's not the breakout player on this team, and he very well could be, who will be the breakout player? You know where I'm going? I'm going a true freshman linebacker, Arian Carter, from just down the road in Smyrna, Tennessee, where a devastating loss was handed to us in the softball playoffs the other night, by the way. He wasn't on the team. He's busy getting ready to start probably at linebacker. He was a 4-star in this past recruiting cycle. They went head-to-head against Alabama for him, and they ended up winning his services. I think because of their depth situation on defense, he will be an immediate starter. I think he's got instant impact type potential, 6'1", 220. I'm not sure what weight they want him to play at, but this is 2023. Like, guys play at linebacker weighing less than that all the time, even in this conference. So Arian Carter, just going to take a flyer on him. Really good player. Wanted by the best. So he's there now. As for the schedule, the Tennessee schedule, they play Georgia every year. They play Bama every year, or at least they have. Who knows what the schedule will look like in the future. Tennessee plays 3 of the top 15 odds teams in the country. They open, for the record, just across the river, just across the Cumberland River. We can see the stadium. It's clear as day outside our window. They open in Nashville against Virginia. And they got a trip to Florida in week 3. That's when they open conference play. They got A&M at Alabama back-to-back. And that concerns me, obviously, because, those are 2 of the toughest games they play. But this is a landmine spot on anyone's schedule. When you play back-to-back road games, it's always tough. So in this particular season, Tennessee has a 3-week stretch. They play Texas A&M at home. They go to Alabama. And then they go to Kentucky the next week. Kentucky is off a bye. So while you're getting beat up against A&M and Bama, and you're going to Lexington a week after you went to Tuscaloosa, Kentucky's just been chilling. It's not the most favorable of late season schedule dynamics there. Tennessee could be a really good team again this year, and I've picked up on some doubt. I've picked up, as is usually the case, when you all of a sudden flash on the national radar, I've picked up on some doubters. We're going to have media days in Nashville in a couple of weeks. And I'm sure that'll be the talking point. How serious should we take Tennessee? That's why I just go hide in the bathroom sometimes at media days or in the snack tent. I'm sure that'll be really big here. I take them serious. And here's the thing. Here's what it'll sound like. How serious do you take Tennessee? I take them pretty serious. Oh, how do you take Tennessee seriously? I didn't ask for your opinion. You asked for mine. I take them seriously. I don't know what more you want me to tell you. They're watching us in China, Texas, Valentine, Nebraska, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Thank you so much for being tuned in. And if you're already here, why don't you just go ahead and click the thumbs up button while you're at it? Because it's free. And it helps us. Subscribe to the channel, too. 56.5% of you are still unsubscribed. We had some questions. And this week will be a normal week. Still going to get you a Late Kick Extra podcast on Tuesday. But we won't have any video elements off of it. And so I figured, let's go in the mailbag and let's take some Q&A for tonight. Just have a little inventory in Colin's back pocket. And so we're going to do it. Here we go. Carson is in Louisville, Kentucky, and he said, what are some of your early thoughts on week 1 games? I got several. I'm not going to do previews or anything, but I mean, Florida State plays LSU on a Sunday night in Orlando, Florida. And LSU's favored by 2.5 right now, and that is one of the beautiful things about college football. In our sport, at least for one more year, you can have a week 1 game that feels like a playoff game because you can already have one of those teams either driving or flying back to their campus after that one's over, knowing we probably have no more margin for error after this if we've lost. And last year's was crazy down in the Superdome, and this year's should be the same. You got Jordan Travis and Jaden Daniels at quarterback. Both of those guys are on several preseason Heisman watch lists, rightfully so. Both of them have win totals of 9.5. It's a great week 1 matchup. Wish it would have been in Tiger Stadium and FSU. Oh man, home games. I've been to one of them. I've been to one at Doak, and it was against Clemson. It was a few years ago. Just lit up. I would love to see that again. By the way, Stats and Info tells me we have only 5 games in week 1 involving a Power 5 team with a spread of under 7. When I am college football commissioner, you will never have a stat like that again. I am telling people when they're playing because it's in your best interest. And I'm not going to deal everyone the kind of deck that the conference regularly deals Arkansas when it comes to scheduling, but you're not all loading up on FCS and G5 nobodies in week 1, getting favored by 50. No. Many more of you are going to step up to the plate like LSU and FSU did. Thursday night, you don't have to wait until Saturday. Thursday night, Florida goes to Utah. Florida at Utah, friends. Thursday night, Utah is a 9-point favorite. This one was an instant classic last year down in Gainesville. And we'll see, man, because Florida, that preseason over-under win total, I really don't think most of the country's seen it yet. I think a lot of the country is going to come back to the table mid-August, and they're going to say, okay, what did I miss? And they're going to flip through the preview mags and look at the odds, and they're going to see 5.5 next to Florida, and they're going to say, that can't be right. It's right. Well, it's the odds. I don't know if it's right or not. It's the odds. And then out in Utah, you're playing the back-to-back defending, well, they're back-to-back. They're not defending anything. They're back-to-back Pac-12 champs, been knocking on the door of the playoff both years, incredibly difficult to beat last year. You got to go into their house in Salt Lake City now. That's fun. It's always fun to watch the SEC go out of conference. You know, Dion's on the road in week 1. They're at TCU. Anyone want to venture a guess, by the way? Point spread there? Colorado at TCU. TCU minus 20. I don't know what to expect. I don't know if there's a bunch of skill in even breaking that game down. I'm sure we will, but I don't know what to expect. Here is my thought. My thought is the same as my sister's thought would be. I can't wait to see what Dion looks like as the head coach of Colorado. That's about it. The Floyd is my witness. I have no idea what to expect. If you know what this is a good spot to do, it's a good spot to bring our friend the alien back down. If I could pick one game in week 1 to plop the alien down next to me on the couch, I pick Colorado at TCU. And the alien has no better guess than me. Like, he gives his prediction on the game, and I give my prediction, and it is coin flip. I have no clue what's going to happen. It's going to be fun to watch, though, because TCU could win that thing 49-0. Colorado could win 24-23, and neither result surprises me. UNC and South Carolina, regrettably, play a neutral site game, but fortunately at least play a game in week 1. The site is Charlotte, North Carolina. North Carolina is favored by 1.5 in this game right now in the odds market. You got Spencer Rattler back at quarterback. You got Drake May back at quarterback. The country can't quite figure out how to process Spencer Rattler, can they? I've told you my opinion. My opinion is as simple as thought he was shackled to the wrong offensive coordinator last year. And once he was free of that situation, in lieu of using much harsher terminology, he looked a lot better. And so this year, that's an entire season of that. I think it'll look a lot better. And by the way, how much do you have to be salivating as a South Carolina quarterback or any kind of quarterback to draw North Carolina's defense as your week 1 opponent. That's got to be a fun August build. And so we've got that one. We got West Virginia at Penn State. I get to see Drew Aller start at quarterback. We get to see Penn State kind of crack their knuckles a little bit. Penn State's favored by 20 in this one. The difference is they're not playing Colorado. They're playing West Virginia several years in now to the Neil Brown tenure. Neil Brown, probably the hottest seat of any head coach in college football this year. And so let's see how that one turns out. And lastly, but not leastly, it's just on a Monday night. Chronologically, it's the last game of the week. Clemson goes to Duke. You have nothing else to do on Labor Day night, college football-wise at least. Keep an eye on this game. Not a big point spread. TCU is favored by a lot more over Colorado, and Penn State is favored by a lot more over West Virginia than Clemson is over Duke. That's a 12-point line, and Duke has got a heck of a quarterback, and they get the home field advantage, whatever that means in Durham, North Carolina. They got home field advantage. Be really fun. Be really fun to watch. You remember Clemson opened with Georgia Tech, I think it was last year, and it was a really tight game for a half, and then Clemson eventually pulled away, but I remember at halftime, it's like a one-possession game, and everyone's going, ugh, this offense looks gross. And it didn't improve a ton, but they did win that one. Well, what if we get like a replay, but Duke actually takes them to the wire? Fun week 1 matchups there. Next up, got another question. I'm going to take another sip from the chalice. We got a good pace going right now. Truthfully, I thought we ran the risk of doing a 2-hour show tonight. We're not going to go 2 hours. Unless I really, really get out of hand with these last 2 segments. But thanks for watching nonetheless. John hit us up from Louisiana, and he said, I saw an article that LSU has the best quarterback room in the country behind USC. Do you agree? Who would you put ahead of them, if anyone? Well, LSU doesn't have the best quarterback room in the country. They got a really good one. You don't have a better quarterback room than USC, at least. I mean, you've got Caleb Williams out there. He's still alive, like he still exists and plays college football. The dude who would have been the top overall draft pick in last year's draft, had he gone, is still out there in Los Angeles. Still out there throwing the football, hitting the uprights from the 50 at Elite 11, those sorts of things. But they also got Malachi Nelson out there too. Another 5-star just waiting in the wings. Miller Moss is out there. No, you don't have a better quarterback room than that. And I'll tell you, and this one may be a little more controversial, I don't know, depending on your point of view, I'd take the Texas quarterback room over LSU as well. Now, that's about it. Those are about the only 2 that I would take. I would take the Texas quarterback room. Now, I probably believe in Quinn Ewers a little more than someone who disagrees with me here, and that's okay. He was under 60% completion percentage last year, so I just flat out expect way higher production from him this year. So given my expectation for that, I got Malik Murphy behind him. That picture that's circulating out of the Texas weight room of Ewers and Arch and Malik Murphy. Maybe Malik Murphy was the alien that we've been featuring on the show all along. Because I don't know where exactly he's been working out, but it does not look like it's been happening on this planet. And this is Malik Murphy. We're showing you some B-roll of him during the spring game. It was one of the most eye-opening performances of any spring game, and it was a bunch of people saying, that's our third string? Well, no, he ran with the 2s during spring, but then when you corrected people, they said, but still, though, that's the second string guy? And then a lot of folks hit him up behind the scenes trying to get him into the transfer portal, and he didn't go in there. And because he didn't, I think Malik Murphy helps constitute the number 2, at the very least, quarterback room in the country. Now, I'll put LSU in the number 3 spot. Jaden Daniels there, Garrett Nussmeier there, Ricky Collins is there. You're talking about like premier potential top 5 draft pick type talent. Quinn Ewers has a long way to go this year to fulfill that potential. But, nothing needs to be said about Caleb Williams. But with Jaden Daniels, that guy right there, that guy played at a very high level last year, obviously. He's back this year. And I'm telling you, that's the kind of quarterback that for some reason, there's a valid reason, but for many reasons, when you talk about him, Jaden Daniels is more fun for me to talk about. Because people put NFL draft talk on the back burner. Like Jaden Daniels is a college football quarterback. Well, I'm a college football guy, so I love players like Jaden Daniels. And also, think about his trip. Whenever he tells his full story, Jaden Daniels is going to talk to you about playing at Arizona State and then transferring to LSU and winning the West in his head coach's first year. That's a great story to listen to. Garrett Nussmeier, I thought this time last year he may end up being the starting quarterback. He wasn't because Jaden Daniels won the job. The other room worth mentioning here, two of them actually, Oklahoma. Jackson Arnold's waiting in the wings up there, won the Elite 11 last year, and he's sitting behind Dylan Gabriel this year. And also, you could throw Tennessee in here as well. We just talked about him a little while ago in the show. Joe Milton, and then behind him, kind of a similar situation, really, to what they have there at OU. You got a transfer quarterback starting, and then you got a very, very high-level guy that's sitting in the background. In one case, it's Jackson Arnold. In Tennessee's case, it's Nico Iamaleava. USC, I think, has the best quarterback room in the country. I think Texas is number 2. You give me LSU number 3, I'm fine. And then Tennessee, Oklahoma in no particular order. That's how I would see that. I'm sure I'll get just complete across-the-board consensus agreement in the comment section. Last order of business on tonight's program. We have just exhausted ourselves of every other topic. Man, I used to never talk about this. What changed? Jesse, I don't know what changed. Nick is in Pendergrass, Georgia. I'll be in Georgia later tonight, Nick. Got a long drive ahead of me. Anyway, Nick said, if you had to hop on the Ramen Noodle Express early and lay some money on a dark horse candidate for the Heisman Trophy, who would it be? Xavier Worthy, plus 10,000 odds. 43rd best odds in the country to win the Heisman. That, Nick, is the player that I'd go bet some money on. And I know that because I already have and got a little bit better odds even than that. He was third in the Big 12 in drops last year. He dropped 6% of the balls thrown his way. I think he'll rectify that this year because I think injury had a lot to do with that last year. And he didn't really talk about it publicly. But I'm here to represent him, so I'm talking about it for him. Xavier Worthy has the same odds to win the Heisman as Hudson Card and Nico Iamaleava, who's not even going to start at quarterback for Tennessee. The injury last season, I think, watered down these odds to where I'm taking advantage of it. And let me also remind those of you out there who say, wide receiver, it's almost impossible for them to win the Heisman. That's true. Almost impossible. But there is an exception to the rule, right? Everyone remembers Devontae Smith. Does everyone remember who his OC was, though? Anyone remember who kept dialing up ball after ball after ball to the tune of 117 catches for over 1,800 yards and 23 touchdowns in only 13 games, facing an all-SEC schedule in 2020? That would be Steve Sarkisian calling those plays for Devontae Smith. There will be a casual or two who takes away from this show. Josh just compared Worthy to Devontae Smith, which of course I didn't do. What I said is if there is a receiver on this particular roster that is positioned well enough to benefit from Steve Sarkisian the way Devontae Smith did, I think it's Worthy. And you are outside your mind if you think there are 43 players more likely to win the Heisman Trophy this year than him. So I think those are good odds. I'm taking them. But I'm not done yet. Let's just go talk about Joe Milton some more. Joe Milton, again, this is a long shot market. This is a dark horse market. If we really are entering an era where any Josh Heupel quarterback is instantly going to be in the mix and he just works magic up there and every one of them throws for 4,000 yards, Joe Milton sitting there at plus 2,200 odds to win the Heisman, the 12th best odds, should be top 10, if that's the case. It's a nice little coin flip prospect there for me. Hendon Hooker belonged in New York City last year. Travesty after travesty gets committed on that stage. Got a good wide receiver core. We talked about it earlier in the show. Perfect offense. And here's what else you need to keep in mind. I detest the phrase Heisman moment. I think it's a joke. But this is an award that writers vote on, so for many reasons, I'm not going down that road. But if you want your precious Heisman moment, need I remind you who they play the second to last week of the year? The University of Georgia rolls into town. Hendon Hooker arrived on the national scene full scale when they took down Alabama and they hung half 100 on them in Neyland last year. We should know. We were there, right in the midst of it. Smoke inhalation on the field in an outdoor venue. It was so thick. Unbelievable. Well, if that were to happen, or anything remotely close to that were to happen, and Tennessee took down Georgia late in the year, and it was Joe Milton hanging 38 on Georgia, what would that do for a late season Heisman push? How about that for a late season Heisman moment? And lastly, yes, I have a third dark horse for the Heisman. This young man has plus 3,000 odds next to his name. He is the 16th player on the odds board, and that would be OU quarterback Dillon Gabriel. Same kind of odds as Blake Corum and Quinshon Judkins. Those are the two highest-ranked running backs in the Heisman odds market. So that's the kind of shot Vegas has given Dillon Gabriel. Everything's just more settled with Oklahoma this year. I have to count on that. I also have to count on the wide receiver core really stepping up for him. Like one of the big questions around OU is, do they have a true wide receiver one out there? Well, if Dillon Gabriel plays at a high level, those things sort of help settle each other, or those settle each other's questions, I guess. They have 8 games last year. I'm looking at his last year's stats. He had 8 games where he had multiple passing touchdowns, and he had an injury that took him out of the Texas game entirely last year, and they got blanked. Gabriel's capable of being in this conversation. And if, of course, this is a dark horse, that means we're taking a risk. I am taking a calculated risk that OU, as a team, sort of turns the snow. It sort of turns the hourglass. The sand starts going the other direction from what it was going last year, and they're not losing the close games. In fact, they're getting margin on people, and he's one of the big reasons why. And as a result, OU is right in the thick of the Big 12 title race, and they're right in the thick of the playoff conversation. Maybe they beat Texas. Who knows? If they do, though, any of those things, it'll be due in large part to Dillon Gabriel, and that will mean those plus 3,000 numbers out there right now would disappear quickly. So I want to grab them while I can. Xavier Worthy, my favorite Heisman dark horse, but I'll also take some Joe Milton and Dillon Gabriel. I think we went under tonight. I really do. I mean, I'm proud of myself because I have a long drive ahead of me, so I was very economical with the show tonight. I got to tell you one more thing. So at the end of months, when we log into our analytics on YouTube, sort of gives us a month in review, and you can dive a little deeper, and it shows year-over-year stuff. This bores most of you. If you're bored, tune out. That's fine. I'll see you later this week. Happy July 4th. For those of you interested in such things, let me tell you what you did. All you did in June is give us right at 100% year-over-year growth in all the key metrics, including revenue. And so I appreciate it. Management sees it. The high-up mustaches in New York see it. I see it, and I appreciate it. And you've given us the opportunity now. We'll have several announcements coming up for you. Some of them I've kind of made publicly, but if you hadn't already picked up on them, don't worry. The month of July, and then especially early August, I'm going to have several announcements coming your way, because when you give us those kinds of numbers, it makes it such that when I go to the bigwigs, they really can't say no. So we just pretty much do what we want. As long as you're hanging out with us like that, we can do what we want. So thank you. Subscribe. That's all I need from you. I appreciate it. Have yourselves a very, very happy and safe early start to your holiday week. For Director Colin, for Producer Jesse, I'm Josh Pate. Take care. Have a great start to that week, and God bless.